Well, it's 7 o'clock and it's time to call the meeting to order. The first thing we will do is take roll, and please say your name and your appointing agency. So Nancy, before you either leave or figure out what you're doing, you want to start us off, please?
Nancy Nelson, Historical Commission rep.
Thank you, Sarah. Oh, Diane Proctor, Select Board. Sarah Grimwood.
Sarah Grimwood, appointed by the NRC.
Thank you. Burton.
Burton Planning Board.
Thank you. John Kratzley. John, you're muted.
Got it. John Kratzley, Select Board appointee.
Thank you, John. Hi, Paul, your turn.
Hi, Paul Bohm, appointed by the Recreation Commission.
Thank you so much. Tom.
Tom Kearns, Select Board appointee.
Thank you. And Peter? We can't hear you, Peter. You're muted. No, you're still muted. Do you know we can't hear you, Peter? You're muted.
I believe
There.
I'm okay now.
Yes, you are now.
Peter Ward, Vice Chair and Select Board appointee.
Thank you very much. And Charles?
Charles Phillips, Housing Authority.
Thank you so much. Welcome this evening and welcome to our many guests. It's wonderful to have you here. We will begin by greeting the applicants in order. The first will be the Assabet River Bluff Preservation and Housing Land Acquisition Project. And the person presenting this, I believe, is Delia Kay.
No, Marcia Rasmussen.
Marcia, are you? It's interesting because I had your name on this, but.
So sorry, Diane, I've been out for the past week and a half, and Marcia is going to be presenting this.
Thank you, Delia. I was just only looking at the signature on the sheet. Marcia,
Delia will be my backup.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you.
Okay. So this is the Assabet River Bluff. It's a land acquisition project, and it's for open space and community housing. Next slide, please. So prior to 2021, 2B Upland, which is a 5-acre parcel, has been discussed as a potential housing site as well as an open space location by housing advocates and West Concord residents at various points in time. In the summer of 2021, real estate signs on the property prompted open space advocates to reach out to the Department of Planning and Land Management, to both Delia Kay and myself. And in the fall of 2021, we've been working with the Concord Housing Development Corporation, the Cochrane Land Conservation Trust, and Sudbury Valley trustees to submit an application for consideration by the Community Preservation Committee. Next slide, please. So the site is a sort of a wedge-shaped site. It overlooks the Assabet River to the northwest, that dark line that you can see. And the Bruce Freeman Rail Trail runs along the northeast property line. This project includes 406 Old Marlborough Road, which is that little rectangular in the lower right corner, as well as an access off of Upland Road, which is a 50-foot wide strip of land, which is sufficient for a subdivision road. Next slide, please. So the goal of this project is to conserve the open space area along the Assabet River, and by providing public access to the trails, along with the access to the Bruce Freeman Rail Trail, and to develop housing that is affordable in the upland portion of the property. Next slide, please. So the asking price is 2.8 million. An appraisal was prepared for that site that supports this amount based on a standard 6-lot subdivision plan, utilizing the property at 406 Old Marlborough Road and then creating 5 new house lots that meet the zoning requirements for a Residence B district. In addition to the 2.8 million request, we've added $70,000 in order to provide the pre and post purchase feasibility, which will include doing survey, conducting site investigation, and the legal documentation necessary to create a purchase and sale, as well as the follow-up for to divide off the open space from the housing piece. Next slide, please. So we are seeking $1 million from the Community Preservation Act funds for land acquisition, $500,000 for open space, and $500,000 for housing, with the remainder coming from the town affordable housing funds of $1.3292 million and private donations of $478,000. Next slide, please. So those, I'm ready for any questions that you might have.
Could we ask you to go back to the previous slide just for one moment, please?
The housing, the funding breakdown?
Yes, please. That would be terrific. It went very quickly, and I want to give people a chance to really look at it. Thank you. Yes, if you could enlarge that for us, that would be terrific. Can you? Is that
Yeah, I
easy?
can't see it at all. Never mind. That's
Okay.
okay.
Oh, Nancy, seeking $1 million. Could you repeat this now and take us through it?
Okay,
slowly?
seeking,
I got it.
Okay.
Don't do it for me.
No, I would like it for everyone. who's-
Oh, okay.
Okay.
so we're seeking $1 million from the CPA funds for land acquisition, $500,000 for open space, and $500,000 for housing, community housing, that is. The remainder would come from the town's affordable housing funds in the amount of $1,392,000. Some of that is already available in the town housing fund's existing budget. And then we would seek an additional $500,000 from free cash or through town meeting appropriation in the 2022 annual town meeting. And additionally, there would be private donations from both the Housing Foundation and the Concord Land Conservation Trust, and the Sudbury Valley trustees would be working toward those private donations of $478,000.
Thank you for going through that more slowly. I think that's helpful for everyone. Thank you so much, Marcia. Are there questions from the committee? Paul and Charles and Burton?
Yeah, I have a few.
Okay, Paul, why don't you start then?
Great, and I'm off mute for the first time. This is terrific.
Last week was a challenge.
So, Marcia, thanks for the presentation. So there are three basic sources of funds that you've outlined. I'm curious, the application talks about a purchase and sales agreement that seems to be scheduled for the fall of 2021, this fall. Is that purchase and sales agreement dependent on securing all of the funding?
To some extent, yes, we will need, we have not yet finalized any kind of agreement. We have been in conversation with the agent that's representing the owners on this. We hope to have we hope to have the select board support since it does involve the and the Affordable Housing Trust funds. A trust group would also have to weigh in on using the town's affordable housing funds for this. And we have outlined meetings with the Concord Housing Development Corporation that's happening, I think, tonight. The select board on the 22nd, and we're hoping to get an affordable housing trust meeting prior to the meeting with the select board on the 22nd. We hope to have an indication from the CPC in favor of the $1 million request sometime in December, or at least by the time the warrant closes. And the purchase and sale would be predicated on an understanding that we would be going to town meeting for this full request.
Right, thanks. That was going to be my question, because town meeting has to be the final say on this. You mentioned in the application that a detailed budget was in preparation by the end of November. what are the components of that detailed budget beyond the numbers we saw in the presentation?
Well, the breakdown of who would be providing what. We're looking at a significant preservation of open space of that parcel. But it is primarily the floodplain and the setback from the Assabet River that would be open space. And so we've, in conversations with the Concord Land Conservation Trust and Sudbury Valley trustees, we're working from a split on the costs of 30% for open space and 70% for housing. So it's that negotiation and discussion that's taking place right now in terms of the more detailed budget. But we do anticipate, we have expended funds for an appraisal so far. We're working on a small, with an engineer to create a development of some kind so that we can set parameters for what the housing might look like. But we're basically proposing a land bank of the upland portion for housing purposes in the future. Many of you know that costs are through the roof right now due to labor shortages and materials shortages. And I think recently the Concord Housing Authority found that a small two-family that they wanted to construct on Commonwealth Ave was valued at $450,000, which seems extraordinarily high to me. And that does not include all the additional components of that. The ticket price was actually $700,000. So we would prefer to land bank the housing component for whatever amount, 2 to 5 years perhaps, while we either raise funds or determine the feasibility of developing this site with additional affordable housing. And if it's infeasible, would sell off the property for development and return the funds to the Community Preservation Committee or to the town. But right now, it's just too volatile to be able to say what it is. And we would like to have community input, have a public process, have some transparency about what that might look like and input. But to move forward, we did do an evaluation of what a planned residential development would be, how it would be accommodated on the site. We used the examples of Riverwalk PRD, which is over on Main Street, and Mill Run, as we thought about how that might fit into the land. And we're looking at, based on the calculations for PRD, probably a max of 11 to 12 units for overall.
Yeah. No, thanks for that level of detail. I have a couple of questions, final questions on the open space part of that. So I was doing the math here. There's 5.61 acres in total and 1.75 at the moment for housing, leaving 3.86 for open space. But you mentioned in the application that 2 acres of that 3.86 is developable. What does that mean? So it's about half of the open space is developable. Does that mean as trails, or what are you referring to there?
I think, well,
I can answer that. So what we looked at in putting that number together was how much of the open space in that scenario was developable in terms of residential development. So in other words, if the town was not, or if a developer purchased the parcel, how much of this land would be developable to housing or to whatever, it wasn't just trails, it was looking at, how much of that land could be developed with structure.
Oh, I misread it. I thought it was referring to the open space part of that as some development.
It was basically sort of saying that if we are able to preserve this is the amount that we are able to preserve beyond what we would be able to do under some other scenario with a developer driving the bus.
Thank you.
And the last question, I promise.
No, it's fine.
As far as the open space, have you thought about subsequent plans? Will there be additional funding required through the CPA or other means for trail connections or development of the open space portion. Have you thought about that?
So very fortunate. I mean, there are some, as you know, there are some well-developed trails that already exist on that parcel now. I think they've been there a long time. They do have connections to the Bruce Freeman. There may be other connections that I'm not aware of, but I would not anticipate that there would be additional need for any CPA funds for any trail development or
Okay.
other amenities that would be associated with passive recreation.
Great, thank you. That's all I have, Diane, thanks.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Charles?
Just to be clear, Marcia, what would be expected for a warrant article at the 2022 town meeting for the housing funds? Again, I mean, is this going to be $500,000? Is it going to be more?
We're anticipating, in addition to the CPA request, an additional $500,000 for housing purposes.
And we have, I see, okay, so it adds up as because we already have somewhere around what 800,000 or so.
We have actually about 495,000.
Could we clarify by what the "we" means, just because
The
for people-
town has in the housing trust fund
Right.
$495,000 currently unallocated and undirected.
Does that address your question, Charles?
Well, then there's so that plus 500,000, but you had 1.3 million or something like that. What's the other piece?
There is a property that the select board has directed funding toward. It's a resale of a house if that comes to pass. And the town is then able to get the house sold before June. Then the proceeds of that sale would be combined with all of this.
Okay, good. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Peter?
Diane, I have a few questions too when you have a chance.
Oh, okay. I didn't see your hand, Burton. I apologize. So Burton, since you're kind of shepherding this, but I'll come back to you. Peter, go ahead.
Question, this is a sizable ask, and I'm just wondering if for some reason the CPC is not able to meet the full request, would this create a challenge for the project moving forward?
Absolutely. Land acquisition is always an expensive proposition. We're not seeking the full amount from the CPC. We are looking at partnering with other groups, but this has traditionally been in other communities the source of land acquisition funds. And so without the full support of the CPC for moving forward, I don't know where the additional money could come from.
Okay, and a related question, do you feel confident in terms of the other sources of funding that those, if they're not in place, will be in place in time to meet the requirements of the project?
This community has always surprised me. So I am confident that we will have those funding sources in place.
Thank you, Marcia.
Thank you. Peter, you're okay?
Yep.
Burton?
Thank you, Diane. Marcia, can you give me a sense of how you came up with a split between the open space portion and the housing portion?
It's a long negotiation. We've gone back and forth between 25 to 40% for the open space. Because this is primarily riverfront property for the open space component, while there are development rights within that riverfront area, it's probably not as extensive as one would assume if it were not riverfront. And so it's viewed as not quite as valuable as the developable portion. Additionally, and I guess that's where we start.
Okay, so if this land, if a private buyer purchased this and you went for subdivision approval, how much of that, do you have a sense of how many units of housing, how many lots could be created? And how much of that, of what we're talking about preserving as open space would be undevelopable? So the root of my question is I'm wondering how much are we protecting from what would otherwise be a private project?
Well, you'd have 6 lots.
Six
You would
lots.
have 6 lots that would be developable. And you would have no control over the open space component other than through the Riverfront Protection Act. So, and you would lose all public access to the land.
Right. So how much of that riverfront access do you, it would be protected, it would protect that riverfront?
So the first,
Yeah.
the first 100 feet of riverfront would be undevelopable.
Okay,
The second, the outer riverfront, the second 100 to 200 feet, there would be development potential within that area.
okay. And Marcia, you mentioned 11 to 12 units. How are you getting at that number as potential?
The planned residential development bylaw has a calculation. So you take your upland area and you divide it by what is the underlying zoning. And then you take a percentage of the wetlands or floodplain and you divide that by the zoning and you give 25% credit for that. So that calculation has been done. And then the yield is 11 units.
11.
Recall that we also have a 2-family that is over on at 406 Old Marlborough Road. So with that existing 2-family, we'd be looking at a project on the remaining property that might be 9 units.
9 units. So,
Housing.
and the reason for me asking these questions is I want to make sure we balance the conservation interests, which I know brought this sort of first identified this, and some of the community concerns around traffic that have been expressed. We've just received some correspondence to the committee versus and with the affordable housing piece. And I think as we move forward with funding, or you know, if we were to move forward with funding, I think knowing what that would be, I appreciate that we're a long way from developing a plan specific, but an idea of how many units would be appropriate there. And I'm thinking, okay, so our baseline is 6 units, which would be a subdivision. And you could go as high as you said, using the PRD calculation as 11. And I know just the one piece of public input we got was said that 6 units wouldn't be as much of a concern with respect to traffic.
6 units with unlimited bedrooms versus limiting 11 units with a certain number of
No,
bedrooms?
I'm sorry,
Okay.
I wasn't clear. 6 units that were developed in accordance with this type of PRD
Yeah.
for affordable purposes, right?
Yeah.
That's my thought. So trying to come up with just an appropriate balance in terms of the density of the housing. And we've got 2 units there. You think at this juncture, I mean, while we're talking to who the different funding sources would be, it would be appropriate to have an idea of that set a number for how many additional units would be built?
I'm not sure I'm following you. What, more than 11?
Well, just in terms of so that nobody's surprised down the road. If a project comes in, that yes, perhaps a project could come in with more than 11, or it could come in that would probably leave the people that were in favor of more conservation use upset, versus people coming in with 2 units and saying, hey, this has got a lot of affordable housing funding. Why are we only doing 2 units? So I'm thinking about how we get to that number.
I think that's going to be part of the conversation going forward over the next month. I have not put that number. I mean, I'm just saying what the calculation shows.
Okay.
And if there are additional open space funds available so that they are putting in a greater percentage of funding, then we can talk about perhaps reducing the number of units. I think that that's a valid conversation. But I don't think it is going to make the cost of housing is incredible, and the cost of land is incredibly high. And so you want a development that will that can be supported and that can, we're talking about subsidizing some kind of construction as well. So there's going to be some benefit of doing a slightly larger number, but we can balance the number of bedrooms in that calculation so that we might be looking at 1, 2, and 3 bedrooms as opposed to a developer that might be looking at a standard subdivision with 4 to 5 bedrooms.
Right. Okay, thank you, Marcia. As you can, and what I'm not trying to be oblique. I'm trying to, I want to make sure we're balancing these concerns, especially from the neighborhood, who I think some of those people are coming forward and have helped identify this as a project and are building community support for it. But thank you, appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Marcia. I just need, Nancy Nelson, go ahead.
I had one kind of baseline question. Why is recreation not identified as a potential funding source in addition to open space and housing? I would
We
think
look at
that-
recreation as being an active kind of aspect, and that's why it's open
This
space.
Wouldn't that be more fields and courts
Yeah.
rather than just quiet paths through
That-
the woods?
I think that's the difference
Yeah,
and why we did
so-
not seek recreational funding.
No, but I don't think recreation is only playing fields and courts and hardscape. I think it can also be trails and paths, right?
So I think the way that we looked at this when we were just putting those categories together was that it was really looking at the open space component and the housing component. And I totally agree that passive recreation is a part of it.
Yeah.
In some ways, it's sort of, which pot do you want to take it from? So, I mean, we could have said half and half from open space and recreation and the other half from housing, but we didn't. We put it in as open space because it's land acquisition.
It gives more flexibility in terms of preserving the open space, because it could be open space or it could be recreation. You could maybe draw from both funds. I don't know. That was just a question, and it doesn't need an answer right now. And what I would really love to see, and I suppose these are not available yet, but rough concept plans that would help people understand what an 11-unit development would look like.
Yeah. We're working on that.
These are back of the napkin kind of concept plans, I know. But is there anything at all that would give us an idea? I mean, it seemed to me that I saw somewhere 5 units, and it seemed to me I couldn't quite imagine how that would happen.
Okay.
And 11 is even harder to imagine. So
We anticipate having something probably within the next week or 2 that we could share.
okay, and then is there anything to describe the exact size of the open space that would be preserved?
Not
I
yet.
know it's 100 feet within, but is there a line on a map that might show where the development wouldn't be and what would be left at the worst case?
We're working on that as well. It
Okay,
would be at least the 200-foot and then some.
yeah,
So,
okay, and you can protect the 200 feet?
yes.
Okay, and then I just hope we get some really excellent architects working on the RFP.
Well,
Because
that'll be down the road.
sometimes affordable housing fails from the design. So that's
Thank
all.
you.
Thank you.
Tom?
Thanks, Diane. Marcia, just a clarification, the goal is general land bank for 2 to 5 years and make available the 2 units in 406 more immediately?
We haven't really walked through all of that yet to make that decision, but it's preserving the open space and creating the trails that would connect to the Bruce Freeman it would be the first thing that we would do upon acquisition. And then make the decision about land banking the remainder or doing something with 406.
Yeah, it seemed like an advantage to me that while there was this land bank that's somewhat indeterminate, that if there were 1 or 2 units that become available rather immediately, seemed like a very positive thing. It may be very complicated, I understand, but
The issue is that the existing structure is a two-family, but it was built in the late 1800s. It is on the demolition review list, so it would have to go through that process. And I believe it is in need of some updates and repairs. So
right.
we are not seeking the funding to do that kind of work right now,
see.
and might need to think about that for, I don't think it's something that we could immediately turn around, but it's something to consider. It is currently on an undersized lot. Our intention would be to create a lot that met zoning requirements to the extent possible. So providing it with 20,000 square feet, and maybe if we can provide it with some additional frontage, we'd look at that as well. But that's part of the conversation.
Thank you.
There's your questions, Tom. Okay, Paul, I see you have another question.
Yeah, it's triggered by Nancy's conversation. So I'm a little confused in reading the application. It specifies the housing parcel, approximately 1.75 acres to be developed, and it specifies open space, approximately 3.86 acres. Are we saying that of the 3.86 acres, some of that also may be developed for housing? Or because I thought the application was pretty clear on what the division was.
Delia, I think you'd better take that one because you're the one who did the calculation.
So what we worked with on the application, Paul, was we took the developments at Riverside, which is about 1.75 acres, and we overlaid that onto the parcel at 2B Upland. And so that's how we came up with the 1.75 for housing and the 3.86 for open space. But as these conversations sort of evolve, we're trying to come up with where that number is and where that line is on the plan. And we don't have that yet, as Marcia said, but we will have that before the CPC needs to take a vote. I believe your meeting that you take a vote is December 1st or December 8th, but we'll have that information to you prior to that meeting.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. Are there other questions from the committee before I pose a question? I want to emphasize the help it would be to have some more specific information, Marcia. Those were, exactly some of the concerns I have. We hear that there are 6 lots, then we hear there are 11 to 12 units, and there are also already 2 units in the upland property. So does that leave us with 9? I mean, the more specificity that we can have, the more prudent a set of decisions or discussions we can have. So thank you. I know this is a big project, but we would, the more detail is helpful, of course, always. Now, wait, Nancy, go ahead.
I'd just like to add that this is really important for this part of town too, in terms of open space and housing. And I just think it's a really important project. Hard, really hard, but important.
Delia?
Diane, could I just also add that, and we will get you the detail. I think, land acquisition projects are extremely challenging because there are so many balls in the air. We're really excited about this because it's a joint project between housing and open space, but it does mean that there's a little bit of a push-pull between how much land can be preserved and how much housing can be created. And there are so many different parameters that need to be considered. So, from the housing standpoint, it has to be considered. You have to be able to maximize the number of units so that the development can be paid for. And of course, from the open space standpoint, we want this to be something where it's not just preserving lands that would otherwise be protected under existing laws and regulations. So I anticipate that we will have a number of units not to exceed by the time that you will go to a vote. And Marcia, correct me if I'm wrong on that. But that's our hope, is that we will be able to come to you and say, we anticipate that this number is the top number, and this acreage is what we're looking to preserve. We won't have it finalized because the plans won't have been developed, but we will get as strong parameters around it that I think should give everybody a level of comfort around what each entity is going to be seeing.
Thank you,
preservation.
David.
Yep.
That's a beautiful answer. I'm now going to turn to the public, and we're under some time constraints, so we'll take as many as we can, although we know this is an important project. If you would say your name and where you live, and then say what you have to say. Hi, Jonathan. Good evening.
Yeah.
Start.
Good evening. It's mostly a clarification. There was a mention of 100-foot setback or something, and if it's my understanding that relates to the fact that we can't develop within 100 feet of the riverbank. Is that the clarification?
I believe that's correct.
Correct. It's currently undisturbed, undeveloped, and so that must be maintained. The 100-foot undisturbed riverfront must be maintained.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jonathan. That's what you needed to know? Terrific. Thank you. Dory, good morning. Good evening. I'm sorry, I always say good morning. Good evening, Dory.
Hi, good evening, and thanks very much. I want to echo what Nancy said. This is most exciting for this part of town that has nothing like this. But one thing that you've mentioned from time to time here is upland, and the upland portion and the old Marlborough portion. Traveling as I do almost every day on Upland Road, I am concerned, very concerned, with having traffic going in and out of that very, very narrow road with a curve which is most unexpected. So I'm very much hoping that I know that the neighbors are supporting this project wholeheartedly and enthusiastically, and I'm expressing, I hope, a concern that others have as well, that having exit to and from this property on Upland is simply not safe. I think there's plenty of opening on Old Marlborough. There are many houses which are being sold at amazing prices for those of us who've lived here for a while. They're exiting and entering on Old Marlborough. I very much hope that this will be in the plan. And as I'm understanding, there is now not yet any clear plan for housing and where it should go. So I'm hoping that this comment might be timely as you go ahead and do further planning. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dory. That's a really helpful comment. Polly Reeve, if you could say your name and where you live, that would be great. I don't think we got that from Dory.
Yes, hi, Polly Reeve, and I live at 429 Williams Road. And I'm here representing the Land Trust, but we're really happy to be working with the neighbors to try to preserve this important piece of land in West Concord, and are excited about the possibilities. And I agree with everything that has, and the Land Trust agrees with everything that has been said about the importance of the balance and really understanding the details about what is being preserved and where is it, and are the conservation values, which are really enormous on this land. And as I said in our letter of support, they really are, because it's in such a densely developed part of town, the benefits that will come from saving a significant portion of this property will really be very large relative to its acreage, because so many people have access to it. So I think as the details start to emerge, we'll just have a better sense of where this is going and the values that we can really start to talk about. But we're excited to be involved with it and are hopeful that it will all come together.
Thank you, Polly, so much, and thank you for joining us this evening. Glenn and Juliana Marmon. Both of you are here. Terrific, but you have to unmute. Okay.
We sure do. Marvin is the last name. But howdy. We live at 416 Old Marlborough, which is right next to 406. And if you look at the sketch of the land parcel, you'll see there's a little rectangle missing on the corner of Old Marlborough and Upland. So hi, we are that rectangle. We are literally surrounded by this land. We've only been here for a couple of years, but it is already deeply special to us, not only in what abuts the Bruce Union Rail Trail, which helps me have a nice, peaceful mental health promoting walk every morning, but also in our backyard. We are deeply encouraged by how interested our fellow community members and everyone in town government appears to be in coming up with some solution that doesn't just bulldoze the whole thing. I will echo some of what's been said before about yes, I think it's really important that we find a good balance here. I think maybe some other community members, although I won't speak for anyone else. Obviously, I would much prefer to see the whole thing preserved, but I don't have that kind of money to do that. So I understand financial realities prevent that. But I do think it's important that we balance the open space with the development, and so I'm happy to hear that is on the minds of other people on the committee. I will also echo Dory's concerns about putting the access to Upland rather than Old Marlboro. It would be on one side of our house regardless. I'm not trying to just do NIMBYism here. There's going to be another road by my house no matter what happens. But I am concerned about the additional traffic and safety of putting it on Upland, as well as the preservation aspect of it. Whereas if you put it through Upland, you have to take down several dozen trees that, quite frankly, are all of the privacy and shade that our lot gets. Whereas doing it another way, you might not have to. I understand there are challenges with that. I'm confident there are things that we could work through. But yeah, did you have anything to add?
Yeah, I would just say that we'd be very sad to see those trees go and a road go in behind our house, frankly. We'd be very sad about that. It would make our lot feel very boxed in as well, with road just kind of on three sides like that. There just does seem to be more space on the Old Marlboro side of things too. And again, echoing Dory's comment about just the safety there and the turn of the road. So we're thankful that we get to put our input in here today. So thanks for listening.
Yes, thank you very much.
Thank you so much for your comments. Are there other comments from the public? Tom.
You hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay. Tom Bailey, 45 Upland Road, across the 2B entrance on Upland Road. Our experience in the last 20 or 10 years that we've been here, 20 years, I don't know, is that people come off of Old Marlboro Road at a fairly high rate of speed. There is no stop sign there for Old Marlboro, and so they generally come off moving at a fairly good rate. And I think the safety of that property and the people on it, and the people traveling on Upland Road, and there's a lot of them, is in somewhat jeopardy because of the way the traffic flows. We have a lot which is right on the curve, and they slow down for our lot because there's a tree there and it's fairly sharp curve. And as they come off Marlboro Road, they don't have to slow down until they hit that particular point on the street. And I know we've had people make measurements of the speed of the traffic that goes through there and that sort of thing. I don't consider it an easy problem. I certainly would prefer an entrance on Old Marlboro Road.
Well, thank you, Tom. I think many of you are concerned about the layout. I think those details would come later in the project when the funds that are being banked, could be used for housing. Burton?
Yeah, just one quick question in response to some of these comments. Marcia, have you looked at the feasibility? I'm mindful of if you put the exit on Old Marlboro, that it's really close to a tough intersection and the bike path. So you've got a lot going on there visually. And have you looked at that as a possibility? I mean, can you say today, no, that won't work because a highway standard or whatever would prevent that?
We have looked at both, and we have not come to a definitive conclusion one way or the other to say it won't work or it will. So I think given what I'm hearing this evening, we'll take a second look at all of that.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Mr. Smith. It's Karen Smith, so I'm sorry, sir, I don't know your first name, so I'm
Yeah, no, that's okay. It's my wife's computer.
right. Can you give us your address and your name, please? Thank you.
Yes, yes. Jonathan Smith, Upland Road. I've heard several times, both in the proposal that was on the town website and also tonight, that the neighborhood is in full support of this. I would differ with that because many people that I live in the neighborhood, and many people that I've spoken to don't know anything about this. They just see the sign, the for sale sign there, and that's all they know. And so I don't know who is supporting this and who has been polled. I haven't been sent anything asking if I would support something. So how would you even know my opinion? So I don't know who the town is talking to about getting all of the support, but I just don't believe it. It doesn't mean that the neighborhood wouldn't support it eventually, but right now nobody knows about it. So
thank you for that comment. Marcia or Delia, have you done any outreach in that neighborhood to try to canvass perspectives?
So we've been working with the Land Trust and the Sudbury Valley trustees, and they have been working with the neighbors, and that is where we have heard there is good neighborhood support for the project. I know that I've spoken with a couple of neighbors in the Upland Road neighborhood and in the immediate environs. We haven't polled everybody, so maybe it's a little bit of a broad general statement, and I apologize, Mr. Smith, if that's the case. But that's where we got that, and that is the Land Trust and the Sudbury Valley trustees have met with the neighbors on a number of occasions, which I'm not sure if you're familiar with those conversations or not, but I'm sure we can tap you into those conversations.
I would like to add that I would also like to add that there was a conversation with the Housing Roundtable, which was comprised of all the various affordable housing groups just last night. So this was relayed to them, and there was no opposition expressed at that meeting, which was attended by the Concord Housing Foundation, the Affordable Housing Trust, the Concord Housing Development Corporation, Concord Housing Authority, and several members of the League of Women Voters. So from the housing perspective, we've tried to reach out to a number of people to be involved in that conversation as well.
Thank you, Marcia.
If I may.
Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, if I may respond. Yeah, I have no doubt that you're involving a lot of different organizations and stuff. And I was part of the initial conversation with what Delia was talking about in some of the initial meetings. There were a handful of neighbors there. Maybe there were 6 to 8 of us there. But I've spoken to more neighbors than that, and a lot of them don't know. So it really is quite a small number that are really truly informed about this project. And that's where I disagree with the general statement that has been made. A lot of people don't know, and they don't know how this land is going to be developed. So that's all. It's just I just disagree with what has been said in the on the town website in the general proposal.
Thank you so much for your comment, and I'm sure it's going to help to inform us, and I mean, not me, but the folks working on this, and to find a way of connecting more broadly, which is often a challenge. And Nancy Kerr, you have a question. Good evening.
Yeah, hi, my name is Nancy Kerr. I'm at 25 Upland Road. And I was at some of those initial meetings with Polly and Krista Collins, and got some early news about the development. And I would say that our support was more on the open space side of it rather than the housing side. So, we have qualified support. And I understand that it's a lot of money to spend just on open space. So maybe there isn't a way to do it without having some housing. But I think the support is that we want to be informed. And I think that's what people were saying. Well, this is great. Thank you for telling us this. And we're waiting to hear some more. So we're getting it bit by bit. The other thing I want to bring up about the access is that before the pandemic, there was a study done. We brought in some fancy agency from somewhere to do a traffic study of West Concord. And so I'm sure that data is somewhere about how much traffic is on Upland Road. They were thinking about making it maybe a one-way street, or maybe putting in speed bumps, or making, I don't know what they were going to do. Lowering the speed limit, whatever, but that might be something to access. I'll try to find it myself. I can't even remember who it was that headed it up, but I will find that out and hopefully pass that on to you.
Thank you, Nancy, so much. I know there have been traffic studies. So the question is, where are they? I'm sure they can be accessed. Are there other comments from the public? Marcia, thank you. Delia, thank you very much. We now move on to the Regional Housing Services Program, which is our next project. And this is again, Marcia. Marcia, you're going to have a busy night. Okay.
This is actually one of the simpler ones, because I'm hopeful that most of you know about our Regional Housing Services Office. It has been an invaluable program to the town of Concord. And if we could go to the next slide, please. Just that some of the history is that the RHSO was created in 2011. It is now serving 9 communities, all of our neighboring communities. The town managers and administrative assistants from all those communities meet on a regular basis once a year to renew their commitment to the RHSO. And we received glowing comments from the town manager of Lincoln recently, who just felt that it was an invaluable service to the community. So Concord serves as the lead community, and our RHSO offices are located at 37 Knox Trail. Next slide, please. So what are the services that are provided by the RHSO? Well, they monitor our home ownership units and our rental units. They make sure that people are following the rules or of their deed requirements, and they check and make sure that there hasn't been any refinancing that might negatively impact the standing of that unit. They also meet with the various agencies that run our rental projects. So Concord Muse, which is now, the Prescott, I think they call it, and Warner Woods are monitored. They meet with the group. They make sure that the affordable units are being rented by people who actually are qualify for those units. They also administer our subsidized housing inventory. As new units become available, they make sure that they get counted. They help administer the home program, which is the Metro West Home Consortium. And it's through the consortium that the town has had access to federal funds for housing purposes. Concord has been very successful in acquiring those home funds through various projects such as the Peter Bulkley project and other Concord Housing Authority projects. And I believe that they were seeking additional funds for their Commonwealth Ave property next to Giroux Park. They also help support our housing nonprofit groups, both the Concord Housing Authority and the Concord Housing Development Corporation. And when there are certain times that there aren't enough funds available, and so the Concord Housing Development Corporation will provide additional funding for those additional services. They assist with the resale of existing affordable housing units. Last year, we had 2 closings for 2 sales in 2021. And the year prior to that, we had 3 housing units sale. They provide resident assistance, sometimes training for what it means to be part of a condominium and part of that home ownership agreement. And then they also support regional activities. And the next slide, please.
Marcia, before you move on, when you say we had 2 and we had 3, do you mean Concord?
Concord, the town of Concord. Yes,
Okay.
I'm sorry.
Clarify, that's okay. because it's 9 communities altogether.
Right.
So
Overall, they had 13 for the 9 communities, which is pretty dramatic and a lot of work. So this year we are requesting, the town is requesting $28,000 to be matched by the town of Concord for a total of $56,000 for the coming year. And again, some of the highlights there, the regional activities, they actually had homeowner information sessions via Zoom and had a really great attendance, actually 75 out of 428 households. That's 528 households out of the 9 communities and 75 of those from those various communities. So it made it more accessible for people. We had 20% additional supplemental services in Concord itself, which included some rental assistance programs that we did not have in Concord, but other communities were involved with that. As I said, the 2 resales were completed in Concord in FY22. And then there's been the Home Consortium has completed an analysis of impediments to fair housing. And we were both planning division staff and the RHSO staff were actively involved in creating an action plan. So there are steps that we are taking to promote and to evaluate fair housing in Concord and to promote fair housing by providing training for real estate agencies and for rental project managers. And then the RHSO also facilitates a housing roundtable. We held that just last night. Next slide, please. So we're seeking the $28,000 in CPA funds, and we're leveraging town funds for an additional $28,000. And as I mentioned, additional support can be provided from the Housing Development Corporation and Housing Authority when such additional services are needed. The Housing Authority has needed those services this past year because they are going through a process of acquiring HUD properties and putting them in their portfolio. And so that's been a very extensive project. And that's the end of my slides, I think. Entertain questions.
thank you very much, Marcia. Charles, would you like to start us off with whatever questions? But you're muted, so this is, yes, okay. You don't have a question. Peter, go ahead. Oh, you don't, Charles. Okay, Peter.
Yes, Marcia, if I'm not mistaken, it's just a point to reinforce. With other towns, do they apply for funding from CPC for 100% of the expense of participating in the RHSO? And in our case, in Concord's case, let's actually match 50-50 with the town.
I believe the majority do provide 100% funding for those communities that have CPC. Bedford, Lexington, Acton. I'm not sure about Lincoln. I don't have all of the details for all of the towns, all the communities, but I believe the majority of those do seek 100% funding from their community preservation committees. And I can find more detail. I'll provide you with actual numbers prior to the 30th.
So some of the towns, look for the 100% funding from CPC.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Peter. Sarah?
Well, just building on Peter's question, I'm just out of interest, are all of the communities charged the same fees, or is it dependent on their size and activities?
There is an overall fee for the administration that everybody pays, but it is based on the number of affordable housing units and the activities that are involved.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. John?
Marcia, what was our support or CPC support the last year?
25,000.
Okay, so small increase requested.
Yes. You also provided $30,000 toward our housing production plan, 5,000 of which will be going to the Regional Housing Services Office for a needs assessment.
Thank you.
Are there other questions from the committee? Peter, your hand is still raised. Do you have a question or is it? Okay, thank you. Are there questions from the public, please? Anybody who has any questions? Seeing none, thank you very much. We'll move on to the third project. Thank you, Marcia. And here you go again, Junction Village Open Space.
Okay. Okay, next slide, please. So Junction Village Open Space is 6 acres that's associated with the Christopher Heights Assisted Living Project. Back in 2013, the Housing Development Corporation acquired 12 plus acres from the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. And the acquisition was limited for the purpose of providing housing and open space. 2017, the Grantham Group sought a comprehensive permit from our Zoning Board of Appeals, and that permit was issued for 83 units of assisted living, with the remaining land to be open space. So in 2020, at the request of the CHDC, the Select Board started creating and then appointing a task force to consider the design of that open space. And in 2021, the Junction Village Open Space Task Force has been working with a landscape architect to develop some conceptual plans for how that open space might be delivered to the community. The next slide, please. So our goals in the project that is being developed is to protect and preserve this large, walkable and accessible open space in the West Concord Junction Village area, to educate the public about the land's rich and important history, to serve multiple populations, including residents, artists, visitors, as well as visitors to the prison itself and nature lovers, and to provide a safe, walkable space for residents of the soon-to-be-built affordable housing project in Christopher Heights, and establish a new large habitat for pollinators. I think the next slide has a picture of the land. So, yeah. So this site, it's a little difficult, but the dark line on the right-hand side of your screens is the Assabet River. The pathway at an angle is the Bruce Freeman Rail Trail, and to the far left of this picture is Commonwealth Ave. To the north is the Concord, MCI Concord, and the 12-acre parcel is located between the bottom of this page and the buildings to the direct north. You can barely see a green line through there. Next slide, please. So the center portion that it's in white on the screen is the Christopher Heights Assisted Living Project. And then there is what we call the triangle on the left, and then the open space that will follow the Assabet River on the right. The concept being presented here is an evolution of design that has been presented to the public once and then further refined by the task force, and is the general direction where we're going. We don't have fine details here. It's still a broad brush, but the overall concept is to have 2 points of entry to create a loop walkway through the property. The large triangular area is going to be the open welcoming plaza kind of experience with some large shade trees, and the yellow areas that you see would be the pollinator meadows that we're envisioning. There are also 2 gray ovals in that location, and those are to present some of the history of the site. This site was the site of the 1859 muster of the Commonwealth's militia. There were over 100,000 people mustered at this location, and it was in advance of the beginning of the Civil War. So there's a rich history there, and we've involved the Concord Museum in learning more about the site and want to interpret that and bring that to life. As well, we've been doing some historical research of the Concord Reformatory, now MCI Concord. And so we want to tell that story as well, how it was initially, it was conceived as overflow for, oh no, I'm blanking on the prison in Boston.
Charlestown.
Thank you, Charlestown Prison. And it was actually there to train young men who'd gotten into trouble into learning certain skills. The railroad went directly into the property so that they were able to deliver materials to the site, as well as take the products away that people had put together. So they were building furniture, making furniture. There was an active dairy there. They grew all their own food. And it really created the impetus for a lot of commercial activity in West Concord, and sort of provided support for how West Concord evolved over time. So that's the triangle that we've been talking about. Then the path would continue through across the Christopher Heights property to the area along the Assabet River, and taking advantage of some of the existing topography there, creating a rectangular seating area. It would be sort of a recessed landscape, providing some picnic tables, providing some boulders or stones or a small wall where people could gather, could have small groups, or just pause and reflect on some of the space that is there. The darker green is existing trees that would be retained on the site. The path would continue along the river with some points to pause and to view the river itself, creating some reflection areas. And then the orange rectangular area is a beautiful stand of sumac that we're trying to preserve, and keeping that and celebrating that. And then you'll see some small black boxes. Those are plinths or stones where different artwork might be displayed. So we're visualizing a space, a passive type recreational space, a loop where people could explore and view the river that is very hidden right now and very beautiful in this location. And but the initial, if we go to the next slide, I think the initial funding isn't going to go very far. This first funding request is for invasive species or plant removal, preliminary earthwork, and some basic trail making. The invasive species are incredibly dense. We have oriental bittersweet, buckthorn, the Japanese knotweed, and honeysuckle that is very challenging to get rid of and to remove. And so that's about half of the request, $150,000. The preliminary earthwork is just to move and begin to establish that trail, and perhaps use some of the excavate from the Christopher Heights project if they have extra. And it's really just the beginning. So may I have the next slide, please? So this year we're seeking $300,000 from the CPA for this phase one. We can use that funding to possibly leverage for Land and Water Conservation Fund grant, which we would hope to match. And then the Grantham Group, who will be constructing Christopher Heights in West Concord, will provide $25,000 worth of earthwork services. So they'll help with with some of the invasive species removal, but more with laying out that trail. Next slide. So that's my presentation. And I think Carleen Hempel is on this, is here too. She is the chair of the Junction Village Open Space Task Force. So if I can't answer your questions, she probably has the answers in hand.
Thank you, Carleen, and welcome to you as well. Questions from the committee. Peter, you want to start us off? Thank you.
Sure. Yeah. Thank you, Marcia, for taking us through that overview. So the first request is for, $300,000. And in looking through the application, it looks like there's likely going to be significant costs to be incurred in what I think is being called phase two, or the second phase. I may have that wrong. I was just curious to get your thoughts on what you think those might be, and whether in that event, there would be a subsequent request next year from CPC.
Well, we do anticipate a subsequent request, but I really can't provide you with the details because we haven't gotten to that fine, that level of detail yet. I know that the group is looking at making sure that any plant landscaping or plant materials are native and that they are, that they live in this climate and under these conditions. I know that we are looking at sustainability and making sure that the stormwater is managed on site and is low impact type of development. And whatever we use for the trails is low maintenance, but is durable and fully handicapped accessible. So the fine details have not yet been refined to the level that we can actually provide an estimate to you, because I think it's going to be a work in progress. We have only had one initial public outreach meeting, heard a lot of good comments that were then incorporated into the design that we are presenting this evening. And I believe that we have another follow-up public hearing scheduled, I want to say in January, is it, Carlene, that we're hoping to get some a better handle on what those design elements might look like. And then the interpretive panels that tell the story of the history of the site, I think could, that could be quite a range of how we do that. It could be as simple as the panels that are currently along the Bruce Freeman Rail Trail that provide some of the history of the trail itself, or it could be a little bit more engaging and involve people. So, and then we would be also looking for grants and for outside funding sources and not seeking fully 100% from the Community Preservation Committee. But so I'm sorry, I don't have more detail.
Thank you. Do you have other questions, Peter?
Well, just in the application, there are, it looks like some draft cost estimates. And is that just how we should look at these, as just preliminary at best?
That was very, very preliminary. We had not really had a chance to fully meet with the landscape architect to talk through what those estimates might look like.
Okay, thank you.
So you don't anticipate those costs accelerating, do you, Marcia?
I don't think so. I think that we would, because we want it to be as low maintenance as possible, we want it to be durable, we want it to be sustainable. I think we are going to be taking correct me if I'm wrong, Carlene, but a minimalist approach in how we do things. But landscaping, getting the size trees that we want to see planted to provide shade for people may be a little more costly, and getting the kind of plant materials established may take a little bit longer and require more maintenance up front. But once they're established, I think they'll do very well there.
Well, having battled bittersweet alone is a is a backbreaking effort. Sarah.
Thank you. So focusing on what you said you would spend this year's money on, I understand there's a lot of unknowns about the whole project now. For the invasive plants removal, you indicate this is a 3-year plan, because obviously it takes several years to be sure you've got rid of the invasive plants. Is the money you're asking for this year to cover that whole 3 years, or just the first year of that work?
I think it was multiple years, as I understood it.
It actually says 3 years in the
the
list, but I wasn't sure if that. Okay.
I will confirm that with the landscape architect.
Okay. And then I also had a question about the preliminary earthwork. Could you please just expand on that a bit more? What you're thinking you would do in the first year?
Well, this site has been used for a variety of different purposes over the years. And it's been a construction yard for the Bruce Freeman, for Route 2, from Mass DOT, for Concord Public Works. It has been a dump site for different individuals. And we're expecting that the Christopher Heights project will have excavated material that they may need to use which we would like to be able to incorporate in some of the locations around the site. So it's working with the construction project that's proposed and anticipated to start in 2022 with the design that we're developing. So that's the preliminary earthwork I was mentioning, as well as laying out that trail to make sure that it is fully accessible.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I wasn't certain that the timing would work with the Christopher Heights, but it sounds like it would. And just lastly, again, I know you have a lot to sort out still, but you know, the original plan that we were first presented had a lot of paved paths for easy access, but I know that that's not going to be compatible with the wetlands and riverbank requirements. So I just wondered, as far as basic trail making for the first year, I mean, is there any more information you can give about that now, or are you still working it out?
Well, we're exploring new material that's been used at Walden Pond Reservation. And as I understand it, it's a stone dust type surface with a material over it. And it is very easy. It doesn't, when it's wet, it doesn't erode quite the way stone dust alone does.
Right.
And it's easy to just rake out and levels itself. So we're exploring that as a possibility. It's permeable. So that's one of the benefits of it.
And are you thinking you'd have that on all the trails or just some parts?
Well, I'm thinking just along the in the riverfront area.
In the areas you have to be more careful about. Okay, got it. Okay, thank you. Very helpful.
Thank you, Sarah, very much. John?
I had a question for Carleen. We have on the applications 3 schemes 1, 2, and 3. And how did the presentation tonight, is that the consensus view of your committee?
Yes, thank you. Hello, everyone.
How did it come together?
We started with those 3 iterations of an idea and submitted all 3 because we were under the pressure of the deadline for the CPC application, which I think was September 15th. Shortly after that, our committee narrowed that to 2. We wanted to have 2 plans to present to the community. And those plans were generally paired from what they were sort of a combination of the 3 that you see. What Marcia presented so beautifully to you tonight was the 3rd iteration, which is a combination of what we think are the best aspects of both plans, but highly in consideration of what the public gave to us as a response. So the 3 that you have, though many of the concepts are the same, the one that Marcia has shown to you tonight in the slide presentation is what we're moving forward through, which is a lovely scaled back version of one of the plans. Again, we always wanted to present 2 different aspects to the public, see what they thought, took their temperature, and now you have the final iteration in the slide presentation.
And would you say that's largely agreed, or there's a consensus among your committee?
Oh, absolutely. We have done a lot of site-based work. We have looked at other parks. We have thoroughly investigated all of the aspects of this, had multiple meetings with multiple constituents. The sort of things that we don't yet have are, and this is through guidance from Delia, I'm going to put together a long list of native trees and also plants, grasses, sedges, things like this that will populate the site. Don't forget, we want this to be a really thriving pollinator meadow on one side, and we also want to actually make the site accessible because it's riddled with invasives on the right side, on the park side. So there's beautiful mature specimen trees on this site, but you can't get to them, you can't see them. And so that's it's not the sexiest work in the world, but that's what the majority of this money will go toward. It's quite difficult to remove and maintain the removal of those invasives. The other thing about the plan that you just saw was absolutely, first of all, as you know, it'll be 100% ADA accessible throughout the entire site, but it's hard to see it in such a small way, but it will emphasize the sort of reflection spots that we wanted to emphasize, and also the incredible opportunity we think this as an education piece for the town with the 3 different sections of interpretive panels. We can imagine Carousel and CCC walking over with their kids. We can imagine Minuteman Arc walking over. We're hoping for a story walk, to partner with the library, and then again to honor the prison, the wild and scenic river, and the incredible history of the mustering site that I didn't know about before this process, and I think many people didn't know about. So there's that education component too, which will be also sort of highlighted by the vegetation and the beautiful trees that we hope to plant here for a shady spot. For a nice sit down, as one of our committee members, Sue Felshen, who's on the call now, has called it.
Thank you very much. Very
My
helpful.
pleasure.
John, do you have more questions, or are you all set?
Oh, no, I just don't know how this emerged. And it sounds like a lot of people made it
Given our
happen.
recent conversation, so Burton, and then Nancy Nelson was next, and then Sarah and Paul. So Burton, you want to?
Thank you, Diane. Just a quick, pretty short question, which is just understanding that how the financing is proposed to be in 2 stages, and I'm unclear how that works with the timeline. So would you be able to construct sort of the initial trails and what would be covered in the first funding, and if need be, leave it like that, or would it, or does this really need to go hand in hand with that second funding request?
I think we envision this happening first and then the second funding request finalizing it. I think we would get it to a certain point. The thing that the other driver in all of this is to prepare a conservation restriction of the riverfront area as part of the comprehensive permit for Christopher Heights. So we want to identify and define what the uses are allowed within that conservation restriction. And so laying out that path is really, really important, and defining what uses can be there. We fully recognize that the riverfront is a very valuable natural resource. The Assabet River is a wild and scenic river, and don't want to interrupt or intrude too much into that, but we do want to give people the ability to access the value, the aesthetic value of that property.
So I'm still not quite clear. Does that mean you could do the phase 1 construction, and then at a later date, if for example, all our funding in next year had to go to land acquisition or affordable housing, would you be able to, would this be able to open in 2 stages?
I think it could. As I mentioned in the presentation, we will be looking at other grants as well. So whatever funding we will take advantage of. But I do think it can be constructed in phases. Okay.
So then a follow-up question to that would be, should it be constructed in phases? We've heard in other projects that there's the Emerson project. They said you don't want to do it, you don't want to do a bit of it and undeploy all the equipment and then do that again. So I'm wondering, should this all be done really as a larger funding request altogether at a future date? Or is there also anything tied to this being completed starting next year?
The driver is the conservation restriction, the construction of Christopher Heights. So I think we do need to, I think that's a risk that we're going to have to take in terms of, if we're taking advantage of the fact that Christopher Heights will be under construction and that they have agreed to provide up to $25,000 worth of in-kind services. So we're anticipating that the work can happen as part of that project. So it's not gearing up for the open space project for the town or for the Housing Development Corporation. It's utilizing what's already out there and getting the preliminary work done.
Okay, thank you very
Can
much.
I add,
Marcia.
can I add to that?
Yes, please.
Just to add an addendum to what Marcia said. So Burton, excellent question. And yes, most of the sort of most or all of the sort of heavy lifting part of this would be as encompassed in that 300,000. The tearing out of the invasives, the roughing out of the path. That will all happen in this first phase with that $300,000. We won't have to go in with that sort of, I mean, we'll be planting trees in the future, but that's a different event than removing all of the debris, you know, roughing out this path and pulling out these tangles of invasives. So to answer your question, yes, absolutely. And it's a multi-year process. So we do believe this has to happen now. And the 300,000 will cover exactly what you're talking about. We're not going to need to bring in those big machines again after this first phase is done, other than to plant trees. But
Okay, thank you very much, Carly.
you're welcome.
Thank you so much. Sarah. I mean, Nancy first, Nelson.
Yeah.
I don't care. Well, I'll be quick. One question, and there's a little bit of a caution in it because I noticed that historic preservation was checked and town council didn't actually address whether or not it was eligible under historic preservation. And I'm thinking perhaps it's not. This is part of a conversation that was sparked by, in my mind, by my attendance at CPC boot camp. And what was eligible under historic preservation funding.
So in the future, as we look at the interpretive panels of the for the muster and for the MCI Concord, I think that would fall under that historic preservation component.
Well,
and we were.
Oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, that I think the reason we put it in there is we were envisioning that and telling the story of how the land contributed to development in West Concord.
I think you might run into the problem that there is no historic stuff left there and that you would just be creating something new to tell the story. That's the caution. That's all.
Good caution.
And a more serious question on to me is, has any investigation of the soil conditions on the site proposed? Has there been that?
Yes,
this is an abused
absolutely.
area.
Yeah.
Okay, so yes.
Yes, yes. I mean, the Housing Development Corporation, when they acquired the land, did extensive
right. Okay.
review.
And anything included in this first phase to rehabilitate the soil? And is that needed? Or
probably, I don't think there's anything to be, we're not anticipating that other than reusing the excavate as we can. And I think the plantings is how we would propose any soil improvements. But again, that will be in conversation with the landscape architect.
Okay. And that excavation is presumed to have decent soil.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And the last thing, I was very interested to learn that Malcolm X was incarcerated there. And that's an interesting angle, I think, in terms of untold stories. That's all I had.
And his conversion process there, yes.
Yeah, exactly. I had no idea.
Amazing sense of history here.
Yeah.
Sarah.
Thank you. Yes, my question was just triggered by the conversation about how the plans have evolved based on public comment and such like, and it just made me realize that the plans that we've got as part of the submission are very different to what you're thinking now. So will you be sharing with us the latest update on what you're thinking?
We will.
Thank you. And just a quick question. So have you given up on the auditorium idea that you had?
You mean the
what's it called?
Amphitheater.
That's what I'm looking for. Yes, amphitheater.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Clearly you're moving toward a more natural presentation of the land, and that, from my mind, that's elegant. Thank you, Paul.
Hi, just a quick question on access. Clearly on the property itself is foot trails. But approaching, if people want to approach the area, would they have to park cars? And if they do, where would that parking be? Is there sufficient parking? There is parking in the rail trail, and there's parking at Giroux. There's parking around there. I presume nobody would park on the Christopher Heights property to access this, but is that part of the planning? Sort of how do you position yourself as a resident to access the site?
I think the access is from the Bruce Freeman Rail Trail. And as you note, there are parking areas already in existence for the Bruce Freeman, both at Commonwealth Ave and at the end of the commuter rail parking lot. This is not going to be actively programmed in any way. So I think it's intended as a place to discover by foot. People will be asked to leave their bikes at the entrance locations. There will be bike racks there. And not ride their bike through the site. There will be some parking at Christopher Heights because people who visit family members at Christopher Heights will probably want to use the trails. So I think that's a conversation that we'll have to continue to have with the Grantham group about whether we can set aside some spaces or not, or look at how that might be managed. But right now, there's no additional parking being proposed as part of this project.
Okay, thank you. Yeah.
I just have any other questions from the committee. I have one last question, Marcia, and it has to do with the ADA accessibility. Given what you're describing, at least in terms of surfacing, I can't quite imagine that being an easy traffic trail to navigate if you're handicapped. And I just wondered, could you be a little more explicit about what that trail substance might be like? And out here on Sudbury Road, we have some of that, what do you call it? That isn't
stone dust.
Stone dust. Well, let me tell you, it is not accessible the minute there's any rain. I mean, we just are a flush in puddles, and then it freezes, and then people are flipping around all over the place. I mean, it is about as dangerous as anything I've ever watched. So, I mean, I guess I was a little anxious when you talked about the stone dust, and I thought, egads, please be careful.
It's a new material that we're just beginning to explore. It was brought to our attention by the landscape architect, Bill Murray. And I haven't been out to Walden Pond Reservation, so I don't know what it looks like. But he believes that it's permeable, it is fully handicapped accessible, and it is a much better surface than stone dust. So again, it has to be ADA. We're looking at it as an alternative to asphalt. So we want to be sure that it is fully accessible before we say yes to that, but we're exploring that as a possibility.
Thank you very much for that clarification. Nancy?
Walden Pond has used a permeable type asphalt on their parking lots for years. Is it different from that?
We are exploring a number of, so there are so many new substances, and the stone dust probably conjures the wrong image, as you were just mentioning, and that the opposite happens when this material gets wet, which is it binds and bonds to itself further. So we know that there are permeable asphalts. We know that there are these new substances. I don't want to use the word stone dust, but we are looking at those. It will be something like that. It won't be straight asphalt. With the idea that it is permeable and it is absolutely ADA acceptable.
Is there a name for it?
Bill hasn't shared it with us, so I will try to find it.
Stabilized stone dust?
Right. That's exactly right. But I have actually a few brand names, and I'd have to call them.
Say the national park has a lot of experience with stabilized stone dust that turns slick and clay-like in wet weather. So some may be improved. I hope so. That'd be great.
And one hopes it is not going to in any way permeate the water table with something that we all later regret.
No, absolutely not.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much.
Great.
Are there any questions from the public in relationship to this project? Seeing none, thank you very much. And Carlene, thank you so much for joining us. I mean, you've been you're a wonderful asset. Bruce Freeman Rail Trail, Town of Concord. And Marcia, here you go again.
Yes, and here I go again. Okay. Heather, thank you. Okay, so the Bruce Freeman Rail Trail, the primary request here is to fund some of the fencing that was promised to residents for the last half mile along the trail. In 2016, our rail trail, that what we call the Phase 2C, was advertised, but the last half mile was not included because the state did not want to have a trail that ended in the woods and have a turnaround at the town line. So they said, we will construct it when Sudbury is ready to move forward with their phase, the BFRT 2D. In 2021, the last half mile of our plans for the 2C were reviewed by Mass DOT, Department of Transportation. And the fencing was questioned by Mass DOT. And because it was questioned, we did some outreach, which was conducted by the advisory committee to the residents along Stone Root Lane and along the pond itself, on all of the abutters to the rail trail along this last half mile that goes from Powder Mill Road to the Sudbury town line. The timeline is such that construction documents are going to be finalized and the project goes to bid next fall in 2022, and the construction is anticipated to begin in 2023. So if Mass DOT determines that they will not fund this additional fencing that we have requested, we need to come up with the funds to do it. It can be considered a non-participatory project expense, and communities can put money toward the project that would allow certain elements to be included in a plan. Next slide, please. So that last half mile, as I said, goes from Powder Mill Road, which is the top of that graphic in the center of this, to the Sudbury town line, past White Pond, and along the backyards of the Stone Root Lane properties, as well as the Mitchell Road properties. Some of these pictures show what that pathway will look like. You can see the steep drop off to the left in the upper left-hand picture. On the right, it just sort of dips and then goes into people's backyards. The bottom picture there overlooks White Pond itself. The picture on the upper right-hand side is one of the neighbors' backyards. It's very visible and very from the trail itself. And then what the corridor looks like on the right-hand side is town land, where the slope goes steeply up to the right. To the left, it is wide open and flat. And then the bottom picture there is another shot of White Pond, and you can see how close the pond is to that slope. Next slide, please. So that's to deal with the fencing for the last half mile is $250,000 of our request. 300,000 is the total amount, and the additional ideas that are being considered for the Bruce Freeman Rail Trail include a trail and bench to view the prison cemetery, interpretive panel for the prison cemetery, what we call naming the unnamed. There are 217 stones at the prison cemetery that simply have numbers on them. And we've learned that Concord Prison Outreach has begun researching what all those numbers mean and who they are, and is documenting the people who are buried there. They are prisoners from MCI Concord who've been buried there since the late 1800s. Up until 1996 was the last prisoner was buried in this location. Additionally, there's artwork along the trail that is being considered. Some additional trees and shrubs and signage where people have felt that it would be really important to enhance existing landscaping, and in some locations, there's additional fencing that may be needed. We had to add some at the Serpentine Trail, going from Powder Mill Road down to the trail itself, because a lot of people, well, a lot of brave souls who like to mountain bike were taking advantage and eroding the slopes along there. So we had to add some fencing to prevent that from happening. Next slide, please. So the estimate from our consultant for the decorative metal fence along White Pond is $60,000. And then the estimate for the 2-rail wood fence on the westerly side of the path is $190,000.
Wow.
I think I was asked early on, well, wouldn't the state pay for some of that? And the only thing that the state would be paying for might be a portion of that $60,000, because they will need to place fencing along there. But they were thinking that their standard is a 3-rail wooden fence. So I don't know what the cost differential is between the decorative metal and the wood fence. I can try to find that out before your hearing later I guess it's in December. And then the additional amenities would be on the order of $50,000. And so that's, I think, my presentation.
Burton, want to start us off, and then Paul? Burton, you're muted.
Thank you. Marcia, can you describe for us just a little more clarity the difference between the fence that Mass DOT thinks is appropriate for the site versus the decorative metal fence in terms of height, and the reason for the different fence?
Okay. Well, the whole process for the Bruce Freeman Rail Trail Advisory Committee had been, leading up to 2016, had been to involve abutters in helping with the design and getting their input on what was important to them and what was of concern, and try to address those concerns. So White Pond is a critical resource for the community. The slope is very steep in that location, and the very narrow it's very short distance between the path itself and the pond in certain locations. The state would probably use like a 48-inch tall 3-rail wood fence for that location, for the extent that would to prevent people from going off the trail and hurting themselves. So that's, I don't know what distance that might be, but the decorative metal fence was one that was identified as one used in another Department of Conservation and Recreation site that outlined, it was a 6-foot fence, vertical wrought iron type design that they felt was more appropriate for their pond, for the pond itself.
Okay. Okay. And so it's a 6-foot metal fence, vertical rails. I personally, I am very concerned about taking that view shed and putting a 6-foot fence, that you'd be looking through that. That feels like you're looking through, window bars, not enjoying one of the most scenic views, I think, in the town of Concord. Have we, but I also appreciate that a 3-foot, this is not about safety per se. This is because I think a 48-foot fence is perfectly protective from somebody falling off the trail. It's about protecting the pond from overuse as a whole new traffic gets in there. Have we looked at other alternatives, such as planting, I don't know, thickets of bushes, or even, I mean, for the money, having summer rangers out there as alternatives to putting a metal fence that once it's in there, we're going to be staring through its bars in perpetuity?
Yeah.
No, we have not looked at alternatives because that was opposed by the neighborhood.
Okay.
In that area.
So the fenced area, is that just, what's determining the length of the fence? Is that just along the old Picard Trust land? Is it town land? Where, in terms of, where is it?
Which fence are we talking about now?
The decorative metal fence.
It would go from the end of Mitchell Ave to the point where the, I don't have the exact dimension, but where the land slopes up.
So there are those
Heather,
trail.
I can
those-
show the picture where the trail goes off to the
Okay.
side.
I know this. I know that pretty well. So
Okay.
so it's where the trails then continue more or less down to the shore of the pond is where the fence would end.
Yes.
Okay. All right. And with respect to I was surprised to
Heather,
see
you can stop sharing because I don't think this shows what I was thinking. Okay.
So with respect to that, the split rail fence on the other side, why is that out of scope of what the MassDOT will pay for?
The problem with not going forward with the project when it should have is that rules and regulations change, the way they view bike paths change. And I think it would have been included in 2016. They're not including it now because the way they look at trails has changed. The reason we feel that it's necessary is to provide that reminder to people that they should be staying within the trail itself and not wandering off. We've had experienced some issues further north of Powder Mill Road where some people have made informal mountain bike paths and have greatly eroded the land. And so this is a way of reminding people, and it won't be continuous along the entire stretch. There will be breaks in the fence along the way, but it's a way of providing that visual cue, that visual reminder to people on the trail that this is a trail, this is a linear path, and you need to stay moving in a linear fashion.
Okay, so the idea is not to delineate the town land from private land. It's not for safety purposes. It's to encourage people not to wander off the trail and make informal trails.
Correct.
Okay, and this is a split rail fence that could it possibly be if there are other sections of the Bruce Freeman that aren't fenced that don't have informal trails. There are some that, as you say, are very attractive for informal trails. Could we not build this additional section, see if there is a problem with use off the side of the trail, and then put in a fence? I mean, I know you've added fences in other places after the fact, or I believe you have.
Actually, we the only place where we've added fences is on the Serpentine path itself. There is a process I have learned that if it's not incorporated in the design going forward, that it would be a little more challenging, and I don't know, and getting access to that site itself will be a little more challenging. This will be constructed as part of the Sudbury construction project. And so it will be easier to install as part of this project rather than trying to go back and put it in after the fact. And I don't know who to do that.
Thank you very much, Marcia.
Okay. Paul? And then Peter.
Yeah. Hi, Marcia. Yes, I'm off mute. Trying to get some clarity on the budget. I know there's uncertainty, and so my understanding is that the non-participatory nature of the fencing, as the term, we think MassDOT has determined, is driving most of the cost here. It looks like, well, answer that question. Of the 300,000 ask, if MassDOT said, no, we'll pay for it, what would be the ask? And like, what's the residual? Because there are a number of things in here.
If MassDOT were to pay for all of the fencing that we have recommended and put on our 75% design plans, the ask would be $50,000.
Okay, and that's the nature of uncertainty here. So when would there be a final determination? You know, as the committee determines what to fund here, it seems like there's a $250,000 uncertainty here in whether the funds are actually going to be needed or not.
We've I've asked our design consultant to submit a letter on behalf of the town to get clarification about that. That letter was submitted back in September. And I just got an email today from the project manager from Mass DOT saying, I still owe you a letter. So I would love to have a letter before you have to take a vote to say one way or the other. But I don't yet have that. I will put in the word that I need it by a certain date and see if that gets them to move any faster.
No, I appreciate you working under tremendous uncertainty here, and I'm not pointing fingers here at all other than Mass DOT to make a decision. The other part of this, the construction is going to start in 2023. Does that mean that the fencing has to be completed in 2023? Could the fencing part of this be postponed in part or all of it to the following year?
If it's included in the construction, we need to have the funding in place. So the project gets bid as a total package, and they don't do add alternates. It's at the contractor's has to use his best, I guess it's called means and methods of constructing the project. We can't dictate it. So the fencing gets installed whenever the contractor decides to put the fencing in, and the money has to be there, which is why the money needs to be there by 2022 when this goes out to bid.
Okay, and the last question, the other funding amount on here, the 570,000 from other sources. What are those other sources and what does that cover? In the application?
In the application.
I was going to ask the same question.
I'm trying to think. I don't have that cover sheet with me. Let me see. That's what, oh, I'm sorry. That is what we have spent to date on 2B. The town has spent a great deal of money for the design of the Bruce Freeman Rail Trail. In return, the state has funded all of the construction, which is millions of dollars.
Right.
Phase 2C was just under 7 million. The bridge construction that's currently underway is, I believe, at in the range of 10 million. And this last half mile is just under $1 million. I believe it's like 850 or 875. So the funding that the Community Preservation Committee and the town have put toward the construction funds is the design part of it is a small portion of the overall project. The 575 is what has been is what we currently have as a contract with Greenman Peterson for phase 2B and 2C, and this last half mile of 2C.
So that the total amount here is more than 2C. It's the combination of the 2C fencing ask here and other pieces. Yeah, okay, that helps, helps clarify that.
Yeah, I'll try to clarify that for you because I don't have that piece with me today. I'm sorry.
Okay, no, thank you.
Thank you, Paul. John.
Well, Marcia, I was curious about the fencing costs and where the estimates or the preliminary numbers come from.
That's our contract, our design consultant who prepares those details, those estimates for Mass DOT. And it's based on linear feet of fencing.
And in this case, the 6-foot-high metal fence?
Yeah.
Now, this is a combination of the metal and the wood of the split rail, right?
250 is the total, yes. It's the combination of the two.
Do you know the breakdown?
190. 60,000 for the metal fence and 190 for the 2-rail wood fence.
Thank you.
Nancy.
Offhand, Marcia, do you know the linear feet? Sorry.
I don't, but I
have to ask because
I can get it for you.
I kind of agree with, I do agree with a lot of what Burton said about that.
The 2-rail fence, the wooden fence is almost the entire length of the of the half mile. So it's a half mile of
Yeah,
fencing.
that's helpful. That's helpful.
With breaks. I think there are either 4 or 5 breaks along the way at different points so that it's not continuous.
Yeah, okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, that's helpful.
Are there other questions from the committee?
Yeah, I have one more, Marcia. Is there any money left over from our last CPC funding of the trail, which I think was in 2021?
Yes, there's about just under 9,000 remaining. And I've allocated those funds for some landscaping in the spring.
Thank you.
The 16,000 of that is going to be installing an ADA accessible ramp at the end of the existing parking area next to the Neshoba Brook Bridge. It was an oversight, and we want to make sure that there's handicapped access at that location.
Thank you. Are there any questions from the public? Hearing none, Marcia, thank you. It's been a long evening with us. We are very appreciative.
Well, I appreciate you taking them all tonight so I could be here. So I do appreciate that. Thank you.
Wow.
And Delia, thank you for your presence and engagement. So let us move forward on the agenda for the CPC. I want to explain. I've had Heather send you, ask Heather to send around the Envision Concord housing, part 4 of the Envision Concord plan. Each committee is meant to send in a report on responsiveness to the various Envision Concord study. And it includes the ones I've sent you include open space, recreation, obviously, historical preservation, and housing. And I think that I don't mean to shortcut this in any way, and I'd love to hear discussion, but my instinct is to write a report in which we just simply indicate how much money we have allocated in the last several years to each of those areas and our ongoing commitment to each. Is there any reason why anybody would wish us to behave differently in a report to the select board? Okay, hearing none.
Sounds very appropriate.
Okay, thank you, Tom. Anybody else? Heather, I hope you and I can conspire to figure that out together so that it's due on the 10th, which is very soon. And I'm sure they would accept it on the 11th if we didn't get it there on the 10th. And their meeting is on the 15th, in which they're going to be reviewing, the select board is going to be reviewing the Envision Concord study and to see how much we're cleaving to or hewing to that particular study as a town. Project update reports, are there any that we need to notice, Heather?
I don't have any at this time.
Thank you very much. I couldn't find any minutes. Maybe I looked in the wrong place, but when I went on the website today, or even this evening, I could not find any minutes, Heather. Are there some?
There's 2 sets of minutes on the website.
I could not find them. Okay.
Couldn't either.
Has everybody?
I found them.
Okay, John, you found them.
They're right here.
Okay, there you go.
Under minutes.
Under, but what's the heading?
It's current meeting documents, November 9th.
I just did not see those. Okay. And I don't know why, because I thought I had navigated it properly. I wonder, Heather, if you would mind waiting until the next meeting for us to okay those minutes so that those of us who didn't find it could read them more carefully. Would that be agreeable? Would that be agreeable to everybody?
Yeah.
John,
Sure.
is that okay with you? All right. Yeah. Terrific. Well, let's all be purposeful. And if I can't find them, I'll call Heather and figure out how I missed them. So thank you. I want to add one thing before we turn to the public for comments. I attended the town government presentation on Saturday with Kari Maitari and and Carmen Reese, and our IT person. It was a very helpful, it was a wonderful program. But in the midst of it, she kept talking about subcommittees and what subcommittees have to do if they meet. And I realized that we routinely form informal subcommittees. For example, Nancy Nelson and I are a subcommittee on the Right Tavern. And so we spoke together about the history of the Right Tavern, compared the last year's presentation with this year's presentation, just so we could both see where we were. Ends up that was illegal. And we should have announced that we were doing this someplace and written minutes to report what we did. So I will go forward from now on, and I will write some minutes up with that. It was a very simple meeting, just a discussion of last year's document and this year's document. So it was nothing that was done surreptitiously out of public view. But it ends up that if Peter and I had instead done this, because Peter, you and I are not the ones that are assigned to that particular project, we would not have been a subcommittee. And in fact, with a committee this large, we wouldn't have even come close to a quorum or a subcommittee. We could have had a great chat about it. But it ends up that Nancy and I officially are a subcommittee. So going forward in the future, we have to figure out how to manage this and how we define it. We may, I will seek Kari's advice on this, this won't be about this year. It will be under your aegis, Peter, next year when you're chairing all of this. But it's going to be terribly important for us to find a way of describing those of us who cover a particular in tandem together, how we describe that, whether that really is a subcommittee. Kari said on Saturday it was. So we have some clarification that we need to make so that we are above board, transparent, and not doing something that would cause others to feel that we were being underhanded in any way. Peter, your hand is up, so I presume you have something.
It's unrelated to the topic you're discussing right now, but I wanted to just ask a question before we adjourned.
Okay, can we come back to it and see if we get this question?
We certainly can, yes.
Okay, John and then Sarah.
Yeah, I gather the subcommittee happens when the two folks who are asked to make a report collaborate in some way.
That's exactly right.
So if the two reporters just did their own individual reports and didn't,
there'd be no problem.
There'd be no problem, and maybe that's the solution.
Well, that may be the solution, John. But if you rely on each other's expertise and clarification so that before they come, you can ask the right kinds of questions, you suddenly get yourself into a subcommittee, conundrum. So I think that, it's going to be interesting. I mean, it's something we have to really think about because we do lean on each other's expertise. We do rely on each other's specializations. And if it's, as I said, if it were just Peter and I talking, if Tom and I were talking about architecture, if Bert and we're helping you with a legal question, I mean, there are all sorts of ways in which we could talk together, but it ends up that if we identify two people to particularly prepare and present a particular project, that becomes officially, according to Kari, a subcommittee. John, what is your thinking about that?
I suppose it turns on how important it is to have that collaboration. I mean,
probably.
I think many of us have reported on individual projects without thinking we needed to talk to anybody else.
Have anybody else, right?
So
Yes.
maybe the guidance is if you feel you have to talk, then you got to make some extra you got to do extra steps.
Yep, so I think maybe that's could be just as simple as that, John. Your clarity of mind is fantastic. Sarah.
Yeah, on encountering this problem on another committee, my understanding is that you can assign one person as the kind of main expert responsible for that particular piece. And they can actually, my understanding is they can gather information from other committee committee members, and then as long as they report back and are the main person, I think it's okay. It's worth looking into. That might be something that works for us.
That would be wonderful. And we're not trying to get around the open meeting law.
No, I understand.
We're just trying to find some way to do this in a way that is, that is
Yeah.
I know you know, that is just straightforward and honorable. Tom, you're an expert in all this. What is your sense?
Oh, no expertise, but I just think in terms of the notion of conundrum that if two people do collaborate, it sounds like submit meeting minutes of the collaboration, and that's fine. So I'm not sure I'm right about that, but maybe you can
The
clarify.
problem is you're supposed to report that you're going to do that so that if anybody wants to join or listen, they may. So you'd have to advertise. I guess we'd have to go someplace on our website and on our CPC site and say that, and you know, that so and so are meeting to discuss this at such and such. Here's the Zoom. A Zoom connection can be accessed, and then we'd have to do it on Zoom, you know, in a very public way. And I can remember, you know, last year when we were doing various projects, you know, we would talk with each other. Not when we were doing site visits where the rules are very clear, but when we were going through various deliberations, we would speak with each other and advise each other on the various expertise, you know, specializations we have. You know, Charles on housing issues, and he'd be able to say, "Oh yeah, but we're doing this with another housing thing." I mean, you know, there was a sense of camaraderie and goodwill. So, I mean, I think how we find a balance between the one and the other is something I hope we can continue to just, you know, think about in our minds as we move forward. Does that make sense, Tom? Okay, Nancy?
I just think we need more research into this because I'm involved in another group that has subcommittees and they have to create them formally.
Right.
And so we have not created any formal subcommittees, and I have no intention of reporting back necessarily like that. So I'm not sure we are subcommittees. I'm going to read some more, and I hope we do some more research because that's this is potentially a really big barrier to discussion.
Well, I asked Kari quite specifically. I said in the CPC, we will have a couple of people pursue one project, and she said, "Oh, that's a subcommittee."
Well, see, maybe I'm still skeptical, I'll just say.
Okay, but I'd be happy to. I mean, you know what? However we work this out, I just want you to know it's an ongoing conversation.
Yeah. It's an important one, really,
and one that which we need to attend. So, now, Peter, you had you had another comment you wanted to add to things.
Yes, as we think about the projects and the applications now that we've been through all the presentations, I was wondering if Heather might have any insight in terms of when we might get some feedback from the town manager and the select board in terms of their priorities in terms of how they view the projects.
I will follow up on that.
It's a wonderful question, Peter.
Yeah, very good question.
Have we routinely done that in the past?
Yeah.
Yes.
We have. And this is for new people who are not on the committee. We've routinely done this. So, okay.
It's proved to be very, very insightful.
It sure has, Peter.
Yeah.
Other comments from anybody? Emily and Linda and Delia, thank you for joining us. Any other comments? Oh, Tom.
Well, we have now, and maybe it's been a while, I'm not sure, but we've received town council's review, right?
Yes, we have.
So as I guess we get into the next round of deliberations, we can begin to integrate that into our discussions more.
Absolutely. And we've also received some money information from Heather.
Available funding.
Available funds, 2 million something. And if we just simply funded never mind, we'll discuss that when we discuss each project. That money could be gobbled up very quickly given the scope of the request right now. So Paul.
Yeah, just a question on the next stage of our deliberations. The structure of that, is it sort of project by project with some agenda? Is that how we do that? Okay.
We go project by project. Heather is a wizard. She produces a form for us that has each project, the amount of money it needs, and then there's a discussion that takes place. And in some ways, Paul, if we need greater clarification or more information, that's a time when that surfaces. It's an opportunity for us to reflect among ourselves about what our reactions have been to some of these or concerns we may have. And so that's how that takes place. Yes, Sarah.
I was just wondering if we have an agenda for next week, just out of interest. I think we have another meeting next week, don't we?
We do.
It'll be posted tomorrow.
Tomorrow.
Thank you. You know, the
yes.
suspense is killing me, Heather. So will we start deliberating on one project at a time, or?
Yes, that's
Yes.
on the agenda for next Tuesday.
Thank you.
Right.
Okay.
Okay.
So with regards to additional information, in our deliberations, there have been conversations about people submitting supplementary material, et cetera. Are we waiting on that until we have the deliberations, or has material come in?
I've not
material?
received supplemental material from any of the applicants as of yet.
Except from Right Tavern, we did rather early on receive a supplemental piece.
A schedule, right? Project schedule.
Project schedule, but I've not heard from Anka Bose, for instance. That was one in which I was concentrating particularly. She has asked me for some guidance on that. What do we mean, and da 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 da. But I've not seen anything come in yet. So John, you have your hands up.
Well, I just wanted to be clear. We still have the public hearing, correct?
We sure do.
Yes, the public hearing is November 30th.
So we will begin conversation and yet have the public hearing as a way to get more input, and then pick up conversation again after that.
That's exactly right, John. Thank you.
I just didn't want to leave out the impact that public hearing could have.
Could have.
Right.
And so then we meet on December 7th and December 21st, following that public hearing. So we have a spate of pretty intense hearings, meetings coming up over the next month and a half, for sure.
So Diane, when we deliberate, then that's not the public aren't invited to join these meetings.
Oh, yes, the public can very much listen to our
Oh,
deliberation
okay.
and is invited to do so.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. Peter.
I'm looking at the website, and it looks like, if I'm not mistaken, are these all new letters of support for each of the projects?
Yes, I've been placing letters of support on the website as they come in.
But they're not all.
Yeah,
They're not all new, Peter. I think there are 2 or 3 that are new, at least that I had not seen before.
Okay, all right.
But they're good to read in advance, to note in advance.
Absolutely.
These are all terrific questions and comments. Does anybody have anything else they want to add as we go forward? I just want to say that we're so lucky to have such an experienced committee because these deliberations this time will be complicated and demanding, and it's wonderful to have you've already heard people like Burton asking questions like, well, now what if we couldn't do this? Or Peter will say, well, we can't quite fund this. What can you do? So, I mean, it is those kind of prudent questions which help us to make more thoughtful deliberations as we go forward. I just want to say how much I respect what you're doing, and thank you. Okie dokie. May I hear a recommendation that we adjourn?
So moved.
Thank you, Nancy. Do I see a second?
Second.
And then a roll call, Peter?
Yes.
John?
Yes.
Nancy?
Aye.
Sarah?
Aye.
Paul?
Yes.
Tom?
Aye.
Charles?
Aye.
Burton?
Yes.
Yes. And I, so it is unanimous. And as they often say in Concord, and I so declare. Okay. Have a nice evening.
Thank you. Bye.
Nice job, Diane. Thank you.
I don't know how to get out of this.